Greetings, scholars, and welcome back. I just wanted to have a bit of a talk on Greek sculpture, and I couldn't find a documentary that quite says what I would say about it, so here we are. I'll just say it myself with slightly less interesting visual aesthetics. I'm sorry. But where we're going from archaic Greece through Bronze Age Greece, Iron Age, into the classical, and then what the Romans were completely in love with and started to copy and then riff on their own as we get into the Roman work later, is this idea of movement. We go from sort of this static where we're looking at the eternal. We're looking at something that is unmoving, unblinking, unreal, and not necessarily just because they didn't understand how to do it better, which I think is a terrible not reason to apply that to ancient art in any way. I think it's just that what they valued and prioritized about the art was very different. So let's just look at two different pieces from two different eras that are a good example of this for me. It is the Quorai, which are some of those more archaic ones, and these are even pretty advanced for the example that we have here with the Critios boy. It is always this youth. They tend to be standing sort of straight at attention, very unmoving, unblinking, very stiff and still. And there's sort of meant to be this eternalness about that. You get to sort of capture youth, capture beauty, and maybe make it not look like a real person, but more capturing the idea of youth and beauty. And so we've got that very static, very deliberately unrealistic look of our archaic ones. We talked about the archaic smile earlier, and we are moving towards exploring movement, right? We are moving towards action. And when something is caught in a moment of action, it means that that's a split second and it's going away, right? You're not capturing something forever. You're capturing a moment mid-fall, mid-run, mid-conversation. So the rice warrior here is a bronze that has been copied in marble several times, but he's got this great contrapposto positioning. And contrapposto, with the in our art terms from the toolkit, is when all of your weight is on one leg. So imagine if you're standing somewhere having a conversation that takes a while and you start to shift. You're not getting uncomfortable, you're trying to make yourself more comfortable, but you start adding this movement. You start shifting your weight back and forth between legs. So if you've got all your weight on one leg, you can lift up the other one and it doesn't change anything. That's what contrapposto positions are. And they're certainly more relaxed. They're more naturalistic, and they indicate a form of natural human movement. And just a moment about this bronze to marble thing that I'm going to try not to go on about too much, but we've got this bronze here of the warrior in the contrapposto pose. And they were expert bronze craftsmen in the Bronze Age, as one would imagine. But moving into marble as this more forever kind of material, we start to see some interesting transitions. So copies in marble of bronze statues became very common, and it started to happen in the Roman period as well. Oftentimes we have marble replicas of older statues that may or may not be lost. And so this one has two great examples of what changes when we get into marble. So stone is stone, and stone is solid. I know, Captain Obvious over here, Professor Obvious at your service. The bronze, you can have areas where it is empty inside. You can have that hollowness, and then you can fill certain areas like down in the feet and the legs to make it bottom heavy and not tippy. You can mess with weight distribution on a very sophisticated scale with bronze sculpture. You cannot do that with marble. Rock is rock, and the rock weighs the same. everywhere along the statue, kind of like a human body. You can't just make the top half empty to make it easier to stand up. So now you've got to start playing with the medium for how to keep the statue from falling over, and making a movement, especially a movement where the human body, if it's stepping forward or it's running or it's leaning, would be catching itself in that action, and you're trying to preserve that, freeze it in stone. You're starting to have weight distribution problems. And before that really mastery of marble that happens in the classical period, you get to see these two things that are being done in this statue here. I point out that the early copies of statues, it was a copy if we had a bronze, and then you've got this marble that it tried to create the same angle and shape. And then it's got these like structural counterweights on it. So you've got this kind of girding piece that takes the wrist and attaches it with just like a pole of stone to the hip. And then down here, you've got this chunk that is just a counterweight to make like a third leg behind him to keep the balance, almost making a tripod out of a human figure to keep the statue balanced and not tip over. And you'll see that while we have like better disguises of it's a tree trunk, it's a cherub, we have all of these different ways to make that counterweight look like it's supposed to be there a little better than this example. We also tend to start to play with marble over the Iron Age and classical period into the Romans, where we've mastered just being able to balance a human form made of marble without requiring these third-party outside counterweights. So this is kind of a great moment where you can see that early experimentation with how to transpose the art of the Bronze Age into a stone medium. Back to bronze, I just wanted to have this moment of Charioteer of Delphi. We've got this monumental sculpture, and the charioteer himself, while he's standing quite upright and straight, you almost might think like a quarry of the archaic period. He's got so much muscle movement in how he is leaning back on those reins. The furrows, the expression on his face are so lifelike. It is truly a stunning piece of sculpture. And then to see him here in this kind of redrawn piece, you've got the charioteer, and then he would have been in a bronze chariot with the bronze horses. We had two horses, and then we had a boy sort of affixing the reins down here at the front of the sculpture. So many, many elements made it up. There was a lot of movement going on, and just so much action and weight and motion and realism in this piece that it is worth taking a moment to just look at how sophisticated the bronze sculpture art reached during this period. And I love what the museum has done here in Greece with loss compensation. We usually think of that as fills, right? Where you fill in the bits of the missing statue with bits of artificial new material to make the whole statue complete so you can understand it. Rather than do that and perhaps misrepresent or lose that idea of what's original and what's modern conservation, they've created this three-dimensional space where they've laid out the pieces of rein, the pieces of the horse, the pieces of the boy figure at the front, and each of those pieces is laid out three-dimensionally where it would have been in that larger multi-charactered sculpture. So you get to see what it would have looked like, the size of it, the general shape of it, how it would have laid out without needing to add modern material. Very clever, very elegant. All right, and finally, the ultimate in really showing off that mastery of marble. We have the Nike of Samothrace, and you've got the original over here on the left that I'm kind of blocking, I'm sorry, and a reconstruction of what she would have looked like when she had her head and arms. And this is a wonderful piece because it really showcases that mastery of the stone and being able to weight, balance, and counterweight that solid material. Because again, a billowy, diaphanous gown in normal human land doesn't weigh much, but when you make it out of rocks, it weighs a lot. So, having that large billowing gown, having those wings spread across the back, all of that had to be very carefully weighted and balanced within the stone itself. And then to add not only movement of her striding and lifting her arm in clearly a forward march, we've got the wind hitting against her body, putting that gown very, very close at the front of her torso, and it billows around her legs and out the back. It's got all of this movement and energy in rock, in stone. So I think once we get to the areas of, say, the original Discobolus, although we have many, many, many versions of that. So which one? That's why I didn't put any in this particular lecture. But Nike, our winged victory, is really kind of a representation of how far we've come from that very static, very sort of unrealistic foreverness to truly capturing a moment of movement and action and energy and life.